We're talking about fall fishing here in the Straight Up Fishing app. And one of the things that we've talked about repeatedly is fall fishing is all about context and knowing what type of body of water that you're actually fishing. Fall fishing information that is very generalized about baits, how fish transition, can be real misleading. You really need to know what type of body of water you're fishing. You need to know what species you're fishing for and where you live in the country. All of those things matter in how you approach fall fishing. Here in the app, we're going to be talking about fishing natural lakes. If you live in Florida or if you live in the Northeast, you've probably fished areas like this before. James Linder has been filming fishing shows for over 40 years, and he knows a thing or two about fishing the Northeast and those glacial bodies of water that they have there.
Target or focus in those areas because of food, oxygen, and current. That's the real key, because they're not anywhere. You just don't dump in the river generally, and they're everywhere. That's not the case. These fish are making very, very distinct movements where you get into areas and then you'll find big, vast groups of fish in a really confined area. Then you'll have vast areas where there are no fish.
There's nobody that I know that knows more about fall fishing on glacial lakes than James Linder. He's been filming fishing shows for over 40 years. And if you've got a question about how you can catch more bass this time of the year, this is the live that you need to be on. James, did I get that right? Was it over 40 years or not? I took a stab at that. It sounded cool.
No, that shows my age. Apparently I have. Yeah, I guess we have, to tell you the truth. It doesn't seem that long.
Yeah, I thought about it. I was like, well, I'm 42 and I've been watching him since I can ever remember. So I figured it must be around 40 years. So he's been filming TV shows.
Well, the good thing is we're still out there, still catching fish. So is Al. I mean, we've been out in the water today. Actually, I just came in. Actually,
Yeah. I'm pretty excited about this. I would say out of the people that I've had in the app, you'd be the most experienced angler that I've ever had the chance to have a conversation with here in the app. There's no doubt about that. I want to tell you a funny story. So I got a question. I thought about making a video about shows, and they said this is how they stated it. It was something to the tune of, this might not be word for word. They said, I heard that a lot of TV shows are filmed on farm ponds or stocked lakes. Is that true? And I remember thinking, a lot of them are, and I started thinking through all the TV shows that I've watched. I was like, there's only like one or two that I can think of that has real fishing. Linder's Angling Edge would have to be probably one of the only few like real TV shows out there where it's like real world examples on like it is what it is. You go out there, you film a show. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't, but y'all seem to always get it.
no, there's no question about that, Brian. Yeah, we've actually made a point to actually we never fish in really private water at all, and almost everything is, every lake that we go to are lakes that you or me or any other angler can go put their boat in and go fish. And actually, a lot of times what we do is more or less discovery from whatever that time frame there. I actually watched that podcast that you did earlier talking about fall fishing, which was sort of intriguing to me, some of your perspective. You know what I mean? It's really, fishing is one of those sports that you keep on learning all the time. There's no question about it. Every time I go out in the water, I learn. I learned tonight. No
Yeah,
question about it. I learned something tonight.
I think it's all perspective or what I've experienced, not even what I think, just what I've experienced. I know this is what I've been doing with the Fall Fishing Academy here in the app this month is actually
Yes.
exploring different types of lakes. Because I know like where you live, a lot of the fall fishing stuff that you hear on TV or YouTube or on TV shows, it actually happens up north. Where I live, it's like kind of not really. Like they're where they are all year long for the most part. And so what I've experienced and discovered is one, it has a lot to do with the species. That has a lot to do with the type of lake and where you are in the country, and a whole host of other things that you have to calculate into this formula of fall fishing. I think it's one of the most, I don't want to say difficult, but one of the most complicated times of the year to fish is during the fall. In the spring, it's just, I don't care how you try to spin it. In my mind, the fish are just going to spawn. Just, however you want to frame it. They're just trying to get to spawn, and then when they're done, they're just trying to eat. But when you go to the fall fishing, the movements in my mind feel a lot more subtle, and it has a lot to do with different types of lakes. So what I felt like you were a good place, a good person to talk to about tonight was natural lakes or glacial lakes, because I know that's what you have a lot of in the Northeast and even Canada up there. And I know you fished a lot of play. When I called you or reached out to you about this, you were like, "Yeah, I'm going to Manitoba to film a show." I was like, "God, living the life." So, um, can we start here? Can we just talk about like what
Brian, I think we
natural lakes
lost
are?
James.
Or did we lose James? You there, James? I see him.
He was having. Here we go.
Internet. Oh, we lost your audio, James. We lost your audio. Did you mute yourself somehow?
Wait.
The internet was. We still can't hear you, James.
Yeah, James, I'm gonna kick you out. You come back in real quick.
Yeah, that might be the best logging back in. We'll get it. We'll get it figured out here. But what I'm going to have James is going to talk tonight mostly on, or not mostly. He'll answer your questions, I'm sure, whatever kind of fishing you may have. But I really wanted to talk about glacial lakes, and I'm assuming glacial lakes and natural lakes are pretty much the same thing. But we'll get his take on everything. How
Are
about
you
now?
one,
You
two,
got
three? You got it
there. You
there?
go.
I got you.
Hear you. Okay,
Okay.
so I'm not sure how much of that you heard, James, but what I wanted to talk, what I feel like you'd be a good person to talk about is natural lakes or glacial lakes, and I think a good place to
Yes.
start is just could you maybe give us like a brief description of what that is, like what a glacial or a natural lake really is?
Well, the glacial lakes, it's sort of we got a lot of different bodies of water, and live in central Minnesota, and I have actually close to 10,000 lakes. Within my 100 miles around my lake, I have a variety of different lakes. And actually, when you did the podcast not that long ago, and you said where the fish don't move that much and they're in the fixed positions, and actually, we have lakes just like that. My lake that's in my front yard here is like that. It's a maximum depth of 24 foot of water. There's deep weed edges, it's got or shallow weed edges, darker water conditions, and the fish don't make really huge dynamic changes in their movements. On the other hand, we have other bodies of water such as Mille Lacs, Gull Lake, which actually have a variety of different. The key here is forage. The food is the real linchpin in so many different bodies of water. You have so many, these fish are grazing on different food opportunities that they have in that given lake. For example, on Mille Lacs Lake, you have crayfish, you have tullibees, you have shiner minnows, you have perch. So each one of those individual prey species set up, and the fish take advantage of different things going on in that lake at any one given point in time. Given there's so many different bodies of water, you know what I mean? Because a lot of times, even like look at Mille Lacs Lake, which is you've been on probably been up and fished Mille Lacs Lake. Have you fished Mille Lacs?
I actually haven't yet. Not Malay, not Malax, not
Well, you
yet.
got to come up, and we should go out there because right now they're just smoking out there. Right
Yeah,
now, a lot of really good smallmouth. But a lot of times, what the fish are, the bigger smallmouths in that lake will intermittently feed on crayfish on the tops of the rock piles. The same fish will intermittently feed on the weed beds, feeding on perch. By the same token, at this time of the year, a lot of those fish are really keyed in on tullibees. The tullibees are going to be coming up in the shallower water, or they'll go out into deeper water and feed. And that's why you see really sort of dynamic shifts in a given population. And the interesting thing is a lot of these fish feed on all of the above. They'll feed on the bugs when they come out. You understand what I mean? So the fish are based on the best available forage in the lake going on at this point in time. That's the deal. It really is an understanding that. If does that make sense
yeah,
to you?
100%. So I've never heard of a tulipy. What is that? Tell us what that is. I want to look that up.
Tullaby are. Cisco's are rainbow smelt.
Okay.
Tullabies are
Okay.
so it would be a Cisco. It would be a Cisco, more or less, which
Okay.
are
Yeah.
more or less like a deep water like a herring. Yeah, and
Yes.
so
Big.
those fish, you know what I mean? Obviously, you go into certain lakes like Pokegama Gull, these bigger bodies of water where they actually have bigger populations that deep water forage. Those fish act so dynamically different than a lake like my shallow water lake out in my front yard because those fish never go out to deep water. I'm sorry, they don't. They never go out to
Yeah.
deep water. Well, they go out to 12 foot of water is going to be deep for them. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
most of the time, the fish are going to be shallow throughout the entire year, inclusive of winter. You know what I mean?
Right.
Inclusive of winter. You know what I mean? Where you go to Mille Lacs Lake, and those fish are sometimes they're feeding up on
You
big
lost
bug
me there.
hatches coming out of the deep water, and the fish will shift out to deeper water for a period of time and suspend. And so they move a lot. So you have to be willing to move with the fish. I mean, that's what it is. And they move a lot, you know.
I like this. I love that you're what you're saying because a lot of the things I notice, and I'm not really sure why they're happening the way they're happening. We do lake breakdowns here in the app, and
Yeah.
basically the way I try lake breakdowns is like coming up with a process of finding fish versus just looking for areas that somebody told you. So one of the things that we always talk about is what does the lake have? Like what's available? If that's grass, lake is where fish will be. And then we always talk about what do they eat? And so when you talking about the fish migrating to different places depending on what the forage is, that has a heavy influence on whether fish actually migrate to these fall transitions or whether they just stay where they are. I never thought about it in that framework because I think about my home lake when I talk
I don't,
about bass don't really move that. Go ahead. Yeah.
uh, our fish, it's like when I say migrate, I wouldn't know if I'd say like migrating or they will be shifting back and forth, taking advantage of the food in the system. You know what I mean? That's what, when I see migrating, I'm thinking they're making big, massive movements. In some cases, like you go in a big bar and I'll use Mille Lacs Lake and it's got the north end of the lake. There's this big giant bar and it's got all the different elements. It's got shallow rock piles. It's got deeper weed flats that go out to 8, 12 foot of water. It's called Miramar Flat. And then it's got deep water shelves anywhere from 12 to 15 that stagger out almost out into the deeper basin, out into 25 foot of water. The interesting thing is, guess who was the first one to, when the bass guys came out to tournament fish? Guess who's sitting on there? Van Dam is sitting on that bar because you go
Yeah.
look at that. That is the biggest main lake flat. It's got all the different attributes to attract fish. It's got the shallow rocks. It's got the big weed flats. It's got deeper rock flats. So those fish, when I say you're saying like the fish are migrating, I would say they're migrating, but they're moving. Sometimes they're moving around this big. You have to understand when I'm saying this is a bar. This bar is big. This bar is 5 miles long. A
Yeah.
mile deep. You know what I mean? This is a big spot. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of different moving parts to it. The interesting thing is, you get a big warm snap like we've had lately. When it gets really warm, a lot of people say, well, the fish will go deep. It's flat calm. Smallmouth bass, you know where smallmouth bass go when it gets flat calm and
Shallow.
hot?
Shallow. Looking.
Wrong. Excuse
Yeah.
me, shallow. You're
Yeah.
exactly. They go shallow. You know why? They feed on crawdads up on the
Yeah.
tops of the rock piles. You're exactly right. The weird thing is when we have cold fronts and adverse, and a lot of people say, well, the fish aren't biting. You know what I mean? We've had to have the brutal cold front. What happens, it brings a lot of that deep water forage prey fish up higher in the water column. Smallmouth bass know where they live in that environment, and when that happens, they go out and take advantage of it. So the exact same fish are moving and taking advantage of the field. It's like cows feeding in a field, and all of a sudden they're out of grass here. All of a sudden they're out in here. They're going to move down by a stream, or they're going to move over here. The fish are grazing to take advantage of whatever's the best opportunities for food in that lake at any given time. And yes, there is, like you're talking about the fall migration. Would I say that right now, we have a lot of, right now it's just absurdly warm. So realistically, I wouldn't personally see. We haven't even seen fall yet here right now, which is really strange because normally our lakes have turned over by now. The water temperature, which there is some big dynamic shifts that happen at this period of time, and the water is so warm. Our weed beds are not even broken down. Usually, what happens is like about this time of the year, the weed edges that were really distinctly set up all summer long, and the fish use those weed edges as more or less like a pivot point, the deepest weed edge in the
Right.
lake, whatever depth that is. If it's 12 foot, if it's 18 foot, if it's 20 foot, okay? And what happens, those start to deteriorate. And what we see usually at early fall, once those weeds start to deteriorate, what happens, those fish that were set up along those deep outside edges and inside that weed edges, the fish will actually move up. You know what I mean? I'm talking largemouth, walleyes, smallmouth bass, muskies will move up onto those shallow flats again once that weed edge sort of breaks down. Okay. And a lot of times we get on some really super cool patterns up here at this exact same time because a lot of times we'll get on sand flats. And what happens is I'm not exactly, scientifically what happens because once these giant weed beds start to die, you have the oxygen depletion in them, and the fish actually get out of the weeds. And a lot of times we'll go
Uh,
up and, we start fishing on sand flats out and away
mhm.
from the weeds. You understand what I mean? Up on shallow
I
spots
do.
where you don't have that oxygen depletion. You understand what I'm saying? And we've always had,
Yeah.
me and buddies, I'm sort of a tournament junkie. I really watch all the bass, walleye, muskies. Watch all of it, tournament heads. And it's interesting that this exact same pattern works for muskies, walleyes, smallmouth bass, and largemouth bass. The exact same thing happens in these lakes up here, where all of a sudden you'll
You
have
know,
really a
it's
pattern, it's what we term as a sand pattern. And why that is, that, whether it be shiners on the sand or is it the oxygen depletion out of the big weed beds or they're pushing out of the weeds is what I should say.
well, if were you saying that to me, it's got to be exactly those two things. It's got to be oxygen depletion, and it's got to be the fact that they're following the food source. I'm thinking about like I'm transposing what you're saying to the lakes that I fish here in the South. So you talked about
Yeah.
the forage going from crawdad to Cisco's or whatever the case may be, and then your most predominant for like Mille Lacs is that bar that has all the rocks, the weeds, and everything on it. It makes sense now that I'm thinking about it with that framework because our spotted bass on Lake Hartwell, Russell, Kiwi, they're not always deep, like it's in 30 or 40 foot of water, but they're always around the deepest water in the lake because the blueback herring is always around deep water. It makes sense
And
now that
that's
you say
where
I just never, yeah. And so
yeah,
when you
right
mentioned
now,
about, go
repeat
ahead.
that one more time, Michael.
Well,
Brian, say that one more time.
what I was thinking about is you were talking about the muskie and all the crappie and walleye moving up on these bars at the same time. For us, it's striper. We have a member in the app, Eric Zinke. He fishes Lake Lanier, which is sort of like where I fish, and I guarantee he would say the same
Yeah.
thing. When the striper, they live on the main lake on humps in the open water all year long, and so that's where the most predominant, most prolific food source is, and so that's why our bass, I mean, they move a little bit, but really not that much. It's not much shifting around, but it's because that shad forage stays on the main lake all year. But that framework that you just gave us is golden. I love the way you explained that.
Yeah, and well, the thing is and so many different people they look at it and you look at one pattern, but even on go to Mille Lacs Lake right now, and Josh Douglas is on this really super cool pattern. What they're doing is targeting smallmouth bass that are focusing on tullibees, and those tullibees are pretty good size. You know what I mean? They're eating stuff that are 6 to 8 inches long, and they're based in deeper water. So he's targeting really giant smallmouth bass. When I say giants, I mean 4, 5, 6, 7 pounders. That those fish are keying in on that big forage. And so they're going to be obviously tuned into some section of the lake, those deeper water points and humps that access those fish to those forage. And right now is a really key time. The interesting thing is, this right now is, guess what? Muskies and also the big walleyes are feeding on the exact same program on our targeting. And most of the time, when you're talking that bigger prey pattern, those are the biggest fish in the lake. They're the largest, absolutely the largest, most dominant fish are eating those bigger prey items. You know,
You,
in
I
by the
love the
same
fact
token,
that
not
you're
to
bringing
say
up.
you.
I just wanted to say I love the fact you're bringing up the other species, which is definitely on brand for the lenders. I don't know how y'all had four different species in a show, but I tell people in the app all the time to watch the other species and what they're doing. Striper is one for where I live, for where you are, walleye, muskies. You got to, if you watch those, do you learn things about bass by fishing for other species? I know it's helped me a ton.
I really personally I think it's a huge to become a really super well-rounded angler. I think every different species has unique qualities and certain personality traits that make you a better angler. And I'll give you an example of this. You're looking at a bluegill or a brim. They have really very, very finite monocular vision. They eat very, very small prey items. If your bait is moving too fast, you're not going to catch them. No matter what, I
Yes.
don't care. If the bait's moving too fast, you're not going to catch them. You know, even a
Yep.
big bluegill, if the bait's moving too fast, it ain't going to get. You know, not only that, about line pound test. You know, the difference
Yep.
of using 4 pound versus 8 pound test and how many fish you catch is a very, very big deal. It's huge. It's a huge deal.
Yep.
You know, in every species of fish has these different qualities to it. You know, and that's one thing when you look at like smallmouth bass in our area, sometimes they'll crush giant topwater baits in. Sometimes they'll, you know, you'll be up on these big flats and there's like big bug catch going on, and you'd swear you can't catch the fish. But as soon as you put a hair jig on or something slow moving, you know, like a drop shot rig and a fuzzy dice or whatever, you know, some inane little tiny little prey thing, you know what I mean? And you say, oh, wow, they're really biting good. Or you throw a topwater bait out there and it's all of a sudden bowling balls are dropping from the sky. And the fact of the
Yeah.
matter is, if you go out there and throw tubes around or jerk baits, you will catch very, very few of them because the more the fish are tuned in on the one specific prey item, the more specific your presentation has to be to catch them
Yeah.
is a really big deal. It's the same thing when the fish are on crayfish, smallmouth bass, and when all of a sudden you get those really warm days and it gets sunny, the fish get up on the shallow flats and they're feeding on bottom, whatever it could be, leeches, hellgrammites, all these different sculpins, whatever they're feeding on the bottom. You know what I mean?
Oh
They're
yes.
they get very tuned in where all of a sudden your presentation has to change based on what they're feeding on. You know what I mean? And that's a really big deal. A really big deal. You know, all of a sudden the fish are feeding on uh, perch, and perch are not generally like pinned to the bottom. When perch get up, they start to suspend off the bottom. You go up on this exact same flat in the Miramar flat, and they're up in these weed edges, and they come up, and the smallmouth bass will actually go into the edges of those hard bottom spots, actually into the weeds to feed, and you can throw jerk baits, and you're catching them suspended over the tops of these weeds, or throwing toppers over the tops of the weeds. You know what I mean? So how do I say it? The species they're feeding on can really determine a lot of the best presentation tactic for a given species. If you're understanding what I'm saying, can really determine what is the best program going on. You know, that's why all you bass guys have 25 rods in your boat,
Yeah.
and they're not afraid to pull them out. Yeah, yeah.
So here's a $9 million question. and I don't know if anybody's put this in the chat yet, James. So just play a scenario. We're out fishing. We fished 4 hours, 5 hours. We hadn't had a bite. We want to use this. We want to use that ideology. What are they feeding on? How is that forage fish moving throughout the water system? How do we know what they're feeding on? That's because for a lot of guys, they're taking in this information, but then they're like, well, I mean, well, Brian, well, how do I know that they're feeding on herring or ciscos or crawdads? What do you have a system in place to figure out exactly what they're feeding on, or is this just through experience through the years? Because it's very easy for
I
us to
think that
go
would
to
be.
lean.
I think the a lot of it, dictates on where the fish are at, and not only that, in some cases you can see it on your depth finder 2D sonar. I know everybody talks about forward-facing sonar, and it's fabulous technology to find fish and cast to them and see. And I've learned tremendous amount from it. But one thing that to utilize your electronics to its full potential is to literally, so many different people like to pull out. Now, well, I always catch them here on June on this point. Fish don't know anything about that June in point. The only thing they know about one thing: food. If they know about the
Food.
food, so what you want to do is you drive around and use your 2D sonar or side imaging to drive around and let you're better off to spend an hour to an hour and a half using your electronics. And I will run, we do this a lot because we go fish a lot of new waters that have never been on before, and we have to break it down just like when you guys are tournament fishing in a expedient period of time. So what you're going to do is run a bunch of water, not one spot, not two spots, 5 spots, 6 spots, and all of a sudden that'll really help you, give you a far better picture of what's going on in the system at this period of time. And it could be all of a sudden we had a back-to-back cold fronts. All of a sudden we had really warm snap, and all of a sudden the bug hatches are going off, and those fish are starting to drift off structures, are holding out in the deeper water. All of a sudden the fish are shallower because of adversely super warm conditions, and the fish are feeding on crayfish up in the weeds or up on the tops of the rock piles. But one thing I say is to utilize your electronics, specifically 2D sonar and side imaging, to go figure out where the fish are now. You know, and that means using it not one spot but 4 or 5 different spots, and that'll give you a lot for me anyway. For me
A
to
lot.
go find fish.
Yeah, that's one thing I do try to do more of this time of the year. I know doing TV shows actually helps you with that because every day that you don't find fish is another couple $1,000s that you're paying camera guys. And like,
Yeah,
it'll make it really good
it,
to find fish. Yeah, so I remember last year
yeah.
I filmed with a couple guys in the app, Chris and Destiny. I fished with Tim, a couple other people, and I did exactly that for practice for those shoots. I just idled until I found bait and brush, or sometimes it wasn't. I was idling using my electronics, but even though I was looking for birds, bird activity, schooling activity, like I mentioned, it could be striper schooling where I live. That's a good indication that there's bait in that area. There's bait in that area. It's probably a good chance there's going to be spotted bass somewhere. But that is definitely, I'm glad you said that because that is, it takes a lot of discipline to sit in that seat at times and just idle and look for fish or bait or structure, the right kind of structure, right grass or the right the right rock. And I think what you said, 2D sonar is becoming underutilized because oftentimes, like I can run almost on plane and mark creeks that have bait with 2D sonar. Pretty much on
You
plane,
got it.
20 miles, yeah, 15 mile an hour, 20 miles an hour.
I can run my boat. I'm running. I was just came back. I was up in Canada doing a lot of filming lately, and I'm running down the lake. I can. My mind works when I'm running 50. I can actually see,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
then again, I'm targeting. It's, yeah, I was targeting for this particular case. I was looking for like larger lake trout, walleyes, and big pike. So these are 15 to 25 pound fish, and you can utilize that to move around pretty fast. Not 50 miles an hour, but I can run because a lot of it's unmapped. I don't have really good maps on this water, so I got to be able to comb water really relatively quickly. But at least 15, 10, 15, 20, up on plane and moving pretty quickly can tell you a lot. It really does. And the fish change. What I was saying, the fish shift in and out on bars. And that's where if you go to a spot and it one spot, and then you go to another spot, and you go to another spot, and if you can see that there's a lot of fish pulled off in that 10, 15, or 15 to 25 foot of water, that's going to give you a lot more uh, better where I should be positioning, not only what I'm positioning or where the boat should be positioned, what I'm going to target depth, but not only that, which baits are going to be more applicable for that situation if they're out in deeper water. Are they suspended up higher in the water column? Are they down pinned on the bottom? You know what I mean? All of a sudden, I'm going to use drop shots or roller jigs if the fish are tight on the bottom. If the fish are suspended up, and then I'm breaking out the swimming minnows, or you know what I mean, swim baits where you're swimming it over high over the tops of those fish. You know.
So that's very good information. Just watching the graph to know it makes it very obvious which baits you should use by where the fish are in the
Yes.
water column. That makes it. That's how we decide what we're going to throw and what we're not going to throw. Um, let's jump to this for a second. So I know you get to fish for largemouth and smallmouth. I tell everybody about the Northeast, all my buddies down south. We all talk about how good the smallmouth fishing up north is. In my opinion, northern largemouth fishing is by far unmatched. The most fun fishing that you could possibly do is northern largemouth. Underrated, completely underrated. And so I think it'd be a good idea to kind of dive into how we target the largemouth versus the smallmouth in the fall on these lakes, specific to glacial lakes or natural lakes. I think is a good idea to kind of go into that a little
Okay.
bit because I think people are going to be surprised at what you say about smallmouth bass. I can't wait to hear what you say about them, but I know there's a lot of common misconceptions from the southern guys about smallmouth bass up north.
Yeah, let's, how do I'll start off with the largemouth first. Okay. Let's focus on largemouth bass. Largemouth bass are far and away in our given bodies of water a lot more focused on weed
Underrated.
edges.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't care. They're weed oriented fish. They are largemouth bass, and no, yes, they'll go out on rock extensions and hard bottom spots out, but they're always associated to weeds.
We,
Do you understand? They're going to intermittently go out and feed on, through a period of time, they're going to go out and feed on those hard bottom extensions associated to the weed edges. Right now, if you were to go out on the lake I was on today, yeah, I'm going to still be catching them the exact same way. You'd pull in here and you'd look at this and you'd look at these coontail mats in 12 to 18 foot of water that comes right to the surface and you say, boys, get out the punch rigs and you got to get to the bottom. So my whole thing is making short casts. You know what I mean? I was out with my daughter and her boyfriend and they're making long casts away from the boat. And I said, no, kids, you got it. It's really simple. What we want to do is get that bait to the bottom. They're making
uh,
long casts. I say, no, I want to make a cast that's like 6, 8 feet away from the boat. Get to the bottom. It's 18 foot deep or 15 foot deep. I want the fish are down underneath these in the base of these weeds. So you take a punch bait with the ones, in a craw tube and pound it on the bottom. And then if you don't get a bite, you reel it up and make the next cast over 5 feet over. And they got tuned into it really extraordinarily quickly. Uh, right now, this is a really because the weeds haven't broken down. But what happens is we get on some really cool patterns right now. It's really prime time for uh, once the weeds start to deteriorating, the lily pads start breaking down. We get on the really the best buzz bait bites,
wow.
chatterbait bites, frog bites. All of a sudden, that shallow water bite. A lot of times, what happens is the once those weeds start to deteriorate, the fish start pushing out towards the edges of the weeds. Once those big weed flats start to die away, the bass will start slipping out. And what they're going to slip out, depending on where the fish are at, if I'm in a big, shallow lily pad flat, they could be just on the edge of those big lily pad flats. Those fish are pulled out to there. You get on, it could be slow rolling a swim jig, slow rolling, a big spinner bait, like one ounce spinner bait, which was one of my favorite things to do. With a Colorado five blade, some type of big trailer on there. We got a lot of vibration, slow rolling. It's a fabulous technique to catch largemouth bass at this time of the year. As these you get out, and let's go out to the next level from anywhere between the 5 and the 10 to 12 foot level, which I would consider the mid depth weed flats. That same thing when I said those fish move shallow, where they were out on the distinct weed edge, set up throughout the majority of the summer. Once they'll start to deteriorate, the fish will penetrate, get back up onto the flats. So all of a sudden, chatterbaits, swim jigging, slow rolling spinner baits up on the flats is really, really big time bite. You're right about that. A lot of up here, we got a lot of walleye fishermen. We got a lot of we do actually have more bass fishermen in more recent years, but we actually have tremendous populations of moderate sized bass up to like 4 to 5 pounds or even 3 to 5 pounds. We don't have those obviously really big ones. I mean, our top of the line fish realistically in most of our lakes is a 6 or 7 pounder. They don't get any bigger in these northern bass. But as far as the population goes, and because we got these big and massive weed flats, we have tremendous depth of population of fish. I know when they'd come to Minnetonka and fish, I mean, all the BASS guys, and they'd come up here and fish, and I was with Fritz and Nixon and all those guys. They say, man, you guys, they don't grow real big, but boy, there's lots of them. And then we learned a lot because we keep on moving. We move away from these key spots, and David and these boys that set up, and they just keep on casting at the same spot. He said, no, there's more.
Yeah,
They just stay on that one, big saddle system. We'd go there. We're the way we'd run and gun fish. We'd go hit that spot, and if you don't catch them right away, we got 40 other spots to go fish. Those guys would
right.
turn around and set up shop on there and never leave that spot all day. You know what I mean? It's a
Yeah,
big spot, but there's no reason because, well, you got all the fish you need. They're right here. You're moving to go find more fish, and they're right there. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So we learned a lot from those guys when they came up here and fished those tournaments. I do know that. Even how would I say it? Their fishing style, their approach, because we're used to where you got a lot more people
yes,
competing for those exact same fish. You know what I mean? Where you have to sit there and figure it out how to go catch them. And they're going to catch
yeah,
one on a spinner, slow on a spinner bait. Then he's going to catch one on a Carolina rig. Then he's going to catch one on a drop shot rig and one flipping a jig. And they're just going to go ring around the rosy, flipping everything through there, whatever they're getting bite on. They're going to catch one. You know what I mean? They're going to catch some fish. And one technique might be the best, but they're going to go through and catch a number of fish doing a variety of different things.
yeah. That's
Um,
like down south when you pull up on a weed bed or something like get him, 2, 3, 4 bites. That's a good spot. Where up north, like you said, you can sit on those places. You got to hit. There's a fish in every hole, and they're going in and out all day. It seems like. So yeah, it makes sense to me to
oh
sit
yeah,
on one
yeah,
spot.
yeah. There's a lot of really good. You're going to see more of them. I noticed that we got Easton Fothergill. Easton, he won the classic. I'll tell you one
Yeah,
thing about Easton Fothergill. Easton Fothergill was in my boat 5 years ago, high school fishing. He was one of our
really.
he would fish tournaments with us, and he was on the high school fishing team for Bemidji,
Yeah, I
okay, or
didn't know that.
Grand Rapids. So yeah, no, so he we got all those kids. They're sitting there weighing fish in our boats. You know what I mean?
Uh,
This is Easton, which to me is flabbergasting in that short period of time. How Easton got into the college thing, the high school went to the college thing, and ultimately won the Bassmaster Classic. And to me, I almost cried when he won the tournament. You know what I mean?
yeah,
To think about it 5 years ago, and he's sitting there weighing. You know what I mean? He's like a marshal in our boat weighing him because we were doing that more or less an MLF format where we have weighing. Every boat's got one of the high school people in the boat weighing the fish for us. You know what I mean? But they learn quickly, you know what I mean? And you can gather so much tremendous information that they learn faster than ever before. And to be able to apply different techniques and presentations and strategies and different things. Okay, I'm sorry I got off on tangents here. I got to
no,
go
no,
back to
no, it's good.
we.
I love it. I'm soaking it all in.
But
Yeah, I'm soaking it all in. This is all good. This is even went in a way better and different direction than I expected it to go.
Yeah, no, there's
So
a lot of really good anglers I know that are trying to get, make it into the best, the elites or the MLF, and trying to get on those tours. And you're gonna see a lot of the northern anglers are pretty good because we have all, like what you're saying, we actually have all these different lakes. We have dark water, we have river lakes, we have reservoirs. They actually have throughout the course of the season up here, you can fish just about any different lake and scenario you would fish on most of the tours. The only thing that there is a linchpin, we do not have the shad based
spotted
lakes. You
bass.
know what I mean? That much. We don't have the shad base. And that takes a while to get your head around those reservoirs where you don't have a lot of weeds. The fish move differently. You got the way they operate and they think. But
Yeah.
okay,
That's
should
what
I go
I'll
back to the smallmouth? Go ahead.
no that just to reiterate what that's what I have is the no weeds shad based lake, and so it was a huge and still is a huge learning curve when I go up north, but it's actually one of my favorite places to fish now. In this weird way,
Yeah.
grass fishing is my favorite way to fish now, even though I don't have any around here. But yeah, you're right. Fishing the way fish move here is drastically different as it is compared to a lot of your northern fisheries. But they're very diverse up there,
Yeah.
and I still say largemouth bass up north are way underrated, way underrated. So much fun. So the dumbest fish in the water is a
Oh
northern
no.
largemouth bass.
Well,
So dumb.
we got a lot of lakes. I know you were just up fishing with Gussie, and how did you catch some
Yeah.
bass?
So
Yeah,
yeah. So
you were in a good
photo
good
shoot.
water over in that area. That's a lot of our filming lakes over in that neck of the woods over there.
I want to go back over there. We were at that lake. I don't remember. It was Fort Lund, of course, and um,
Yeah,
you know how it is.
big pine. Yeah, I know.
We're there to shoot photos, not even to catch a bass. We pull out from the ramp. There's some of that rice in the grass right there at the boat ramp. And Gussie's like, "Yeah, I caught a nice one on a fuzzy dice." I was like, "Yeah, whatever, but I probably won't catch one." We spent about we probably caught a dozen in an hour right there on a fuzzy dice. It was crazy. I'm like, come down here and try that. I want you to come down here to Lake
Oh,
Hartwell right now. Trying to catch 10 fish an hour. You'd be lucky to catch 10 in a day. You'd have to be on them to catch 10 in a day right now.
yeah, that's what
Really?
that's the really interesting. Yeah, that's one thing where you can actually we have so many different fish in these lakes where you can experiment with different things, and so you can learn a lot. And not only that, for you to get really good with any technique, you got to catch a lot of fish on a
Gotta
given
catch them.
technique. Not only that,
Rep-
you got to catch them in a wide variety of different situations, whether it be deep or shallow. And for you, if we were you catching them on deep weed edges out there, or were you fishing?
No, they were booty butt shallow. They were you could see the bottom just right there at the boat ramp.
Oh,
I
it's
don't remember the lake.
ramp.
What
Oh,
was
is
the name?
that right?
Yeah, you
And he's
the
out there
bottom.
throwing fuzzy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just throw it
Wow.
at the rice. Just throw it at the rice. You
Yeah.
would think you could see the fish if he was there, and I don't know where they come from. Throw it, and then it's just crazy. Just
Yeah.
with
That
northern largemouth,
the interesting thing.
I was
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Should we get back to the smallmouth bass? I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I
yeah.
got sort of sidetracked.
Let's go small
As
mouth.
far as I was going with largemouth bass, and you coming out to the edge of the deeper weed edges. Right now, there's a really prime, real finesse fishing. You know what I mean, where you're throwing a lot of Nico rigs, jig worm fishing, Ned fishing along the edge of the deep weed edges. And actually, what happens is that those fish, once that water temperature starts to get cold, they're going to dump back out of those weeds, but they're going to get and hold right to very close to those edges, but they're not going to go deep. They're going to be stay on those deep or associated to those weed edges, and they're not going to go. like out in like in some deep water winter fishing spot. You know what I mean? They don't do that in these lakes that much. You know what I mean? You're going to go past 12, 15 foot of water. That's where are at. Smallmouth is completely a different animal. Smallmouth, for the a good portion of the year, early season, obviously they're shallow rock related. You know, as they're spawning early season. Throughout the midsummer months, the fish a lot will intermittently move shallow, up on the shallow rock piles, in the weed edges, and then off the weed edges. Right now, where I've been fishing smallmouth, I've been catching them out on the almost the same spots where walleyes are at. You're catching walleyes intermittently when you're fishing for smallmouth bass all the time. I just fished a tournament about 2 weeks ago, um, and I was catching them in like 18 to 22 foot of water,
Yeah.
and you're drop shotting. You can see the fish, you know, on forward facing sonar. You can see them, you know, 2D sonar to go find them, but it was all about the presentation where you're sitting on the fish and ultimately figuring out what the fish is willing to bite on, you know, and we were catching them on anything from a drop shot minnow to a fuzzy dice to a 2 inch tube, and fishing it like very, very slow on the bottom, almost like live bait rigging where you're dragging it away and then getting away from the boat. A lot of times these fish are all to the point where you got to let it sit there and you got to figure out some little idiosyncrasy to get them to bite the bait. How do I say that? They're a lot like it's a lot more. Actually, smallmouth bass are a lot more like walleyes than largemouth bass to me, because when they're super aggressive, they'll bite really big things moving really really quickly. By the token, when they go off, to be able to go something really tiny, you know what I mean, where you're using baits that are at a half or an inch long baits is really key to catching numbers of really, really big smallmouth bass, in how in that bait's moving very, very slow, very, very slow, whether it be,
Yeah.
you know, dragging it
Yeah.
on the bottom. It's very, very subtlety of it, you know.
Yeah. It seems
It,
my experience with weather
Go
too.
ahead.
They're very affected by weather, cloud, wind, all the things seem to really get smallmouth. Like, hey, wait a minute, we don't want to do that no more. I love catching smallmouth on crankbaits, and it seems like I don't know if it's just the lakes that I've been to up north or if it's way out fishing crankbait. But when it's cloudy, they tend to not like it as good as they do like on a calm, clear day. They're just very seems to be very sensitive to weather changes. What I noticed.
You're right about that. Actually, smallmouth are really fair weather fish. They actually do, as a general rule, those fish are they like the sun in warm as a whole. But I'll tell you one thing about those fish. I actually won a number of big Canadian tournaments, and I actually won it fishing for suspended fish before there was forward facing
Before,
sonar.
right?
I actually won. I
Yeah.
won it up on Rainy Lake, and at this point in time, we actually had a tremendous population of rainbow smelt in this lake. And what
Yeah.
we would do is go out there and fish for suspended fish over 50 to 40 off these 20-foot ledges that, primary points, but then it dumped into like 40, 50 foot of water. And these fish would swim straight off those points in 20 foot of water, and they're feeding on the smelt. So what my brother and I would do is take a minnow, and it literally what we termed as moping, and you'd be fishing vertically right below the boat so I could control the bait. I understood what depth the bait is in the water column because we knew that the fish were at about the same depth level at these points, which was about 20 foot. 20 foot is the end of the point before it dumps into deeper water, and the fish went straight off. And
Hmm.
and the interesting, what I was trying to get to about that, when the best time when those fish in that suspended would go on, and when you catch those open water fish,
Probably
cold
clouds.
fronts,
Cold
clouds
fronts.
and
What?
overcast, because all of a sudden the tulipies, all of a sudden the water temperature the tulipies would come up higher in the water column.
Ah,
The
right.
smallmouth bass that were feeding shallow all of a sudden you get this, and all of a sudden those fish know what's going on. See, they're a lot more in tune with their environment than what we perceive. You understand
Yeah.
what I'm saying? That all of a sudden these fish, you get a weird cold front, and all of a sudden you come out in the lake and you say, "Wow, it's cold," and all of
Yeah.
a sudden the temperature, yeah, and all of a sudden, no, do you know where those fish went to? They went out to go feed on open water forage. Do you understand? They're not saying they're not feeding. No, they're feeding really good. They're just taking advantage of a different food source. You see what I'm saying? And
Right.
that's and how fast it can change. It's really just unbelievable because all of a sudden those exact conditions when it got warm, flat, and sunny, you know where those fish do? They turn around and they
What's
swim back to the bank or that primary point and they sit there and they dump down and they're sitting on those points. We put an underwater camera down there and you go along that point, there'd be 50 bass there, 50 big smallmouths. We'd come back there a day later, you come down there, you put a camera down there, guess who's there?
nothing?
They're all gone. They move.
Yeah.
See, you see what I mean? And you sit there and you think about it. That's how fast those fish are, and that's where smallmouth bass are far and away far more volatile and
Mm.
sort of not untrustworthy, but
Untrustworthy.
you have to follow them. And those fish move around, and they actually set up. They actually did some really super cool studies up on some Canadian lakes where they tracked a whole bunch of them. And what they fish were doing, they were actually making like trap routes where they're set up off this point, and then
Uh,
they'll be moved down to about a next sunken hump, and then then all of a sudden the fish are over here on this next secondary hump, and then all of a sudden these fish were actually making like a ring route of movement and taking advantage of different feeding things. You know, once they run out of food or bait, they ran out of that, then they're going to move over to this spot, and they move over to this
yeah.
spot, which is really interesting because this exact same. They did some other studies with muskies up in these same lakes, and the muskies did a very, very similar, what I'd say, how do I say it, like trap lines of how those fish
Yeah.
were set up and moving. You know what I mean? Where they were
Right.
actually moving in a, it wasn't random. It wasn't random. We'll put it that way. No. Yeah.
Added to it. So you know something that I thought
Yeah.
about. Let me know. And this is very what I'm about to say now. This is very far fetched and almost conspiracy theory like. So I thought about one thing that's different from your northern fisheries than what we have here in the South is in the South, the bass is at the top of the food chain for the most part. On your lakes up north, smallmouth and largemouth are not at the top of the food chain. And so I've always wondered one thing that I've noticed or that's helped me catch fish when it's cloudy up north, St. Lawrence or Champlain, especially if I'm fishing for smallmouth, I actually put the moving baits down when it's cloudy and I drag on the bottom. And I started thinking about that. And I said, I wonder, and this is just me thinking. I don't know that this happens. I'm like, I wonder if the fact that maybe those fish feel a little bit more uncomfortable about moving around when it's darker because they might get eaten by the muskie or whatever
In
else.
big, in big, big, in big pike and all different species of fish. I personally believe that too. They would have the tendency to be a little bit more
Like, let me sit
they're
down.
far and away. I do. They move around. I do know this is what the biggest thing is. I'd say about understanding the nature of the two fish. Smallmouth bass are definitely far and away more willing to move in very short period of time. You know, it's very easy to find a big school of fish there. Uh, you know, like on Champlain. Yeah, you come back there, and I saw that. I fished some MLF tournaments and BAS tournaments over on Champlain, and I had the big same thing, the biggest schools of smallmouth bass I've ever seen, and there was perch that was literally 25 foot to the bottom in their schools of bass smallmouths everywhere. In between third and second day of practice and the tournament, I came back to during the tournament. Adios,
Nothing.
amigo.
Yeah.
And never caught a bass off that edge. And I was just absolutely flabbergasted. I know I talked to Ike and Ellie about it. He goes, "No, I told you, Jim." He said, "No," he says, "You turn around and all of a sudden all those fish, they're gone with the wind." He said, and I went out there and I'd say, "No, I can go find them. That they're out suspended out in deeper water somewhere in Bubba." I don't know where they went to because I couldn't figure out where they went to. They were gone, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know.
Yeah,
But I know that
yeah,
Iconelli told me the same thing. He says you got to be careful out here. He says because all of a sudden those fish will be gone really, really quickly. So don't you got to find a lot of different spots, like lots. You can never have enough spots for smallmouth bass.
right. I've definitely experienced that before, and my tournament results can show that 22, 23 one day, 12 the next. 22 to 23 the
Yeah,
one day, 50 the
yeah.
next. I've seen it a times. Um, so that's I want to jump to a couple questions that guys submitted on the app earlier. So and we'll get off here because I know it's getting late and you're practicing for a tournament. You probably want to go, and I got kids that I hope haven't burned my house down while I've been out here shooting this. Hopefully they haven't. So one of the best questions that I had submitted was from Kevin Skavinsky about an algae bloom up north. I don't get those. Don't have experience with them a whole lot. I've seen it one time on Oneida. What do you like to do for the algae bloom this time of the year?
It's the weirdest thing you say that because we just shot a piece on Lake Vermilion. Al did.
Yeah,
And we actually had, as they said, we've actually had really adverse weather conditions. It's been very, very warm. At this time of the year, when you actually have really warm conditions in fall because of the fertility, that you have really distinct algae blooms, like more so than even during the summer. We get really thick algae blooms. You know what Al's pattern was? Fish in bluff walls, like 12 to 15, 20-foot sheer rock bluff walls, and even deeper, okay, bluff walls where it dumped sheer walls, catching them
uh,
on top water baits along the edge of in the algae blooms along the bluff walls,
now why would the top water be a
suspending.
deal there? Oh, because they got to get up to the light, trying to get it to the light.
I I don't know that. I'm just telling you the pattern because even Al was somewhat stunned about it because actually he was up shooting with another buddy up there, Hayes, who's a guide up on the lake, and he says, "No, Al, I got this really cool deal going on," and he goes up on these and he's throwing toppers and throwing poppers, and you pull it like a foot and a half off the bank, you might as well reel the bait up and throw it back up there again. The fish are suspended
Uh,
2 to 3 feet down, sitting on the bluff walls in these are smallmouths with algae up on the surface of it. Actually, we do that a lot up on Lake of the Woods throughout the summer, midsummer month because we get really big algae blooms up there. And a lot of times, what you do is it's a lot like really dark water fishing for largemouth bass, like really dark water, and where the fish
charge
are, soup,
big
they're
king
super
bait.
shallow. Right,
Okay.
they're up on the tops of these rock piles, and they're right in the boulders. I mean, they're knee deep water, and they're up in there, and you can catch them on slow rolling a spinner bait. It could be cranking. You know what I mean? In some cases, the weird thing is when those fish are in any of those dark water conditions like that, or how do you say, timing is everything because you can go there and say when they're off and on, you know what I mean? It can be really, really different. You know what I mean? When the fish are on, it's just they keep on coming. And
Right.
when they're off, they can be really, really off and hard to catch. Do you understand what I mean? And the fish didn't move from there. The fish are just sitting there. It's just like your dark water fishing for largemouths on shallow rock piles, and when the fish are there and they're active, they keep on catching them. But when they go bad, it can be very, you know what I mean, where you got to really experiment with some different things to figure out what the fish are willing to bite on. And a lot of times with that could be very, very slow, something moving very, very slow, but little black worms, you know what I mean? Something moving really super slow on top of them, right up into the boulders. If the fish are active and then we're throwing, cranking or throwing spinner baits or a chatterbait, you know. Actually, they had the tournament up on Easton Fothergill won that tournament on Leech Lake, the BAS Open last summer.
Right.
It was interesting to me because I was just dumbfounded because you had all those guys out chasing minnow fish, and I didn't realize it. And then I found out what was happening because all of a sudden Leech turned really dark. The water was dark in color, and where
Right.
Easton ended up catching those fish was shallow. He was fishing
Ah.
shallow. He was fishing. He's fishing what you'd term as, you know what I mean? It's a lot of our almost
Yeah,
like spawning spots. You know what
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean? No, excuse me, they're not like they're spawning spots. We'll put it this way: they are spawning spots.
They are spawning
And every,
spots. Yeah,
those they are spawning spots, and that's where a lot of those guys were all baited out, and they're all over on the south end of the lake off Diamond and all Huddles Reef and all the deep rock piles out there throwing minnows around, chasing fish and trying to drop shot and stuff. And then I was looking at what he's doing, and I go, "Ooh, I know what's going on." Well, then even I guess Cody got on it too. Whatever, he pulled out the chat, got on the chatterbait and started fishing, running shallow water, throwing chatterbaits up in shallow water, and all of a sudden he's weighing in 22, 23 pounds. You know what I mean? That's the fish aren't deep, fish are shallow. You know,
yeah. It
and
makes
it was
sense. You just
because of the water quality. Water, all of a sudden, the water qualities only could see 4 foot and 3, 4 foot. Usually, Leech Lake, when it's clear, I can see the bottom. I can see a dime in 20 foot of water, 15 foot of water. I can see a dime on the bottom. You know what I
right.
mean?
So it's
But
interesting. Basically, we're treating the algae bloom just like you would dark water largemouth fishing, no matter where that is. That's interesting. I wonder. I always
yeah,
wondered if it worked. It makes sense though. Makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
Um, Here's another one from the same guy, Kevin Skavinsky. He says, when water temperatures drop to 50s or 40s, what type of structure are you looking for when you're going after large and smallmouth? And he says, if I can find weeds that are still green, I fish them, but they can be far and few between in late October, early November. So I think it's just mainly when the water starts to get colder. Is there anything specific you start to do in the fall, 40 to 50 degree water?
That would be two different presentations, one for largemouth bass. I'll give you one for largemouth bass. I know one thing, largemouth bass, we're still big on jerk bait fishing. Once the waters get in, particularly into the 50s, it's obviously a really big deal. But once that water temperature gets into the 40s for largemouth bass, then all of a sudden start really slowing down your speed, and that turns into jigs and finesse jigging. And when I'm saying talking finesse jigging, light jigs. And I've seen this multiple times. The difference of throwing and a very light jig. I'm talking throwing ace and slowing your drop speed down, and you're dropping that bait. You want that thing to be moving really, really slowly. And I sat in back of Al a number of different times throwing half-ounce jigs where it's moving too quickly, and you throw that little finesse jig out there and moving it really slowly on the bottom, and that slow drop speed, and it's like snap your fingers and you're catching them. You understand what I mean? This is largemouth in particularly when you're weed fishing, the edge of dying and decaying weeds. Smallmouth bass, when the water gets in really cold, we do a lot of like blade bait fishing, can be really, really good. Where you're popping blade baits out in deeper water condition, and actually even slow rolling, like we can throw A rigs, you know what I mean? Slow rolling A rigs can be really fabulous, you know what I mean? But a blade bait could be really one really key bait, really key bait. Even drop shotting to a degree, but if if I came down to really cold, and this is once water temperatures into like the 50s into the 40s, most of the smallmouth bass will be really starting to position on wintering spots. And smallmouth bass for wintering spots are really specific locations. They're like generally boulders. You come to a flat, and then it falls off and flattens out on the base of the flat. And then you have staggered boulders out in anywhere between 15 and 20 foot of water. And the fish are set up on those at the base of the flat is what I'm saying. They're at the base. They're on the base of the flat. You know what I mean? They're off to when you bottom and then it flattens off again, and the fish are sitting out and spread out on those isolated boulders. So what you want to do is go find specific bottom composition is really super critical. And we drive around and you can actually go visually see that based on side imagery and what is the right bottom habitat for where those fish set up for wintering type spots is a general
I see.
rule.
Yeah, all bottom transitions is your deal for smallmouth. Seems
Yes,
like almost all.
yes, yeah, yeah, but not it's but it's really the the right rock is really key. Bigger, larger boulders that is not solid rocks. It's spread out
Uh,
on sand. You understand?
okay.
It's isolated rocks that are staggered in the base of the flat, and they're sitting around
Uh,
these rocks, and they're just positioned. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
yeah. Got it.
Which is,
Got it.
yeah.
So, Michael, did you see any other questions that popped up in the? Those are the ones that were submitted in the app that I saw. It was mainly Kevin was the only one. Did we have any other ones that were submitted, Michael?
I've seen a couple pop in the chat. I didn't see anything else. Tron Foster asked about what's a jigworm.
I think he'd be talking
A
like
jigworm
sort of
is,
like Ned rig type deal.
yes. Yeah,
Okay.
sort of, but normally when we're talking a jigworm, it's a shaky head. It's a shaky head worm is more or less that's a shaky head. It's what we term as a jigworm. Yeah,
Got it.
we use those a
I,
lot. Yeah, that's a really. But then again, that's a really same thing with that really lightweight drop speed. We're using a lighter drop speed with a little bit larger worm, so it's going to slow the drop speed of the bait. That can be a really
got it.
good cold water largemouth bass bait as well for
Yeah.
jigworm fishing. Yeah,
Perfect. Perfect. This is some good stuff, man. I tell you, like, I knew this was gonna be one of my favorite ones. This because the way you break down and frame a lot of these things are like, this is I like the it makes you think about it differently than you normally. It
yeah.
normally it's explained. Um, may,
Well, Brian, you froze up on us.
So should I just take command of the
food
ship?
you, Lake. What's the food
Wait,
word?
wait.
Oh, I
Brian,
must
you
No,
back
he's
with
back.
us?
freeze up. I lost you. Yeah, I'm back with you. My internet must have freeze up. I didn't hear you. Let's
No,
see.
go
Tim
go ahead. Go
Dawson
ahead.
had Tim Dawson says, could bass be focused on different prey in different parts of a body of water? I would say so. Could bass be focused on different prey in different parts of a body of water? I would have to say absolutely have to say yes. Would you? What do you think, James?
Not even a question about that. All the different portions of the lake are different in the different, even a different lake basin. From even fishing the same if you're fishing a really big bar, the fish can be keyed in on different forage or prey items on that
Yeah.
one, even if it was a really big bar. Not even a question about that. Yes, yeah, and not yes, absolutely. Yeah, not even a question about that. Yes,
Right.
yeah.
Have to say where I live. We'll take one or two more, then we'll call it good here. So here's one from Declan Kraft. He says, "What's your best recommendations for finding smallmouth using 2D sonar? What kind of landforms above water will tell me where to look below?" Hmm. So I think he's just asking where do you look? Would you pretty much explain that? But where do you like to use your 2D sonar to find smallmouth?
Uh, 2D, I use 2D a lot for a variety of different things. 2D, it'd be really unbelievably for finding because you can obviously see bigger boulders, but as far as bottom composition, but even the way you look at an individual spot, a lot of times what smallmouths will do will have the tendency to be positioned on a specific portion of an underwater structure. When I mean a point or a sunken island, and the fish can be like on the sharpest drop off ledge drop of it, or they can be on the flattest spot that starts like the top of a ridge. If you're understanding what I'm saying, there's different for you to if you're using 2D sonar. You're looking, and it wasn't that long ago. That's all we had. So that's what we used to catch all the fish was doing that in analyzing. And what you're doing is, I would have the tendency to drop a lot of waypoints based on when I drive around an underwater structure with 2D sonar and dropping if you have a good map and drop the habit waypoints so I have understanding how the habitat is laid out, and that would really determine how I'm going to be making my specific casts. If you understand what I'm saying, and we used to do
Right.
this a lot. You know what I mean? And this was even before we had side imagery and all these other things. And we actually was beneficial for us because I had would spend enough time to go drive around and figure out these satellite humps and harder bottom extensions out and away from the underwater structure you're fishing. It could be a rock pile, it could be a point. But when you go start breaking it down and driving around it, and you can really identify very specific portions of it where the fish are most apt to set up on it, because almost any difference, if they're not like spread out like peanut butter, like on toast, it's not like that. The fish have the tendency to set up on really specific spots or underwater cover elements on that structure. And that could be the rocks and the way the rocks are laid out. You know, it could be the sharpest spot. It could be the top of it. If it was a really deep one, it could be the very top end of like 4 or 5 different bigger boulders in one specific portion of it that where the fish really set up on, if you're understanding what I'm saying. And this
Yeah.
very saddle the elements of it. You have to go drive around a lot, and you have to drive around and look. Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely seems like you do have to look around on the lake a lot more this time of the year instead of fishing. Seems like. Um, I think that's all we have here, Michael. I think this was a good one, James. Thank you for taking time, especially while you're fishing tournaments, to come spend some time with us and
No,
talk
that's
fish. Man, this has been awesome.
any
I'll make sure to send. I know you guys have millions of hours of footage. You probably don't need any content. We record all this, and I can send you a Dropbox where you use this for anything you might want to use it for. But we're
okay.
really thankful for it. I have quite a few guys in the app from up the Northeast, and it's where I have the least amount of experience at. So I'm glad you're able to answer a lot of our questions about how fish move and transition and what they eat, what they do, especially like the algae bloom question that we had there. Like, I don't know what that. I'll go up there and catch some smallmouth and I head back down south in a week. That's how it always works for me. So I appreciate you answering all these really good questions. And you give me a totally different mindset and framework to think about why fall, even where I'm at, why they do what they do here. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate it a whole bunch. If there's every
No,
anything I could
that
do, you guys, please let me
if
know.
you no, if you know, Brian, when you come back up here, we got to get on we got to go get out on the lax. So you'll enjoy it. It's this time of the year because it is like really stunning what they're
Yeah,
catching there right now. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, yeah, four to sixes. I mean, lots of them
I already
right
told
now.
Spro.
I mean,
I already told Sproul, I was like, listen, you're gonna have to, because it's too far for me to drive up there. I was like, listen, you're gonna have to figure out how to get me a boat so I can bring my boys up there and go
well, I guarantee you, we got more than our fair share of
fishing
boats.
one day. It's too good.
We got a
So I
lot
don't
of
know.
we got a lot
I,
of boats. Actually, there's some really good smallmouth fishing even right over by the plant. Actually, over by the Lund factory, there's some really good ones over there. Those don't we don't want to talk about those too much though.
All right.
I
Did
don't
we
know.
did we lose you,
You
Brian?
locked up again?
yeah, from you listen to me again.
All right, we got you back.
So I was just saying that we fished a lake right there close to the plant. I just can't remember what it was. It was like 20 minutes away from the plant. Then I stayed
Yeah,
there at Thumper Lodge, Ottertail, I think Lake Ottertail.
sure.
So, but yeah, I want to come up there and fish next summer with my kids. They would love it, especially my middle one. James Linder,
Oh yeah.
folks, y'all give a hand of applause. You won't hear anybody but me, but they're clapping. I promise you. James, just
No,
get
thanks.
out there.
Anytime we can help, give me a ring, and I'd be more than happy to come on again. Whatever, whenever I'm always here.
Yeah, I definitely will. We'll do one for definitely like the summer smallmouth. I didn't think about that because we have quite a few northern guys, so I'd love to.
Yeah.
Looks like the internet held out just till the end. Brian, we still got you?
Am I there? Can y'all hear me? Or did I disappear again?
Yeah, we got you now.
No, no,
Oh,
you're
guys.
back in. Okay.
Okay, good. I'll definitely reach out when we get in the spring to summer period right there, and we'll definitely reach out again and see if we can get you to talk some more northern fishing when we get there. Thanks, James. I appreciate you, man. You have a good rest of your night. Hey, and catch them in that tournament. I can't wait to hear how you do there.
Me too.
Yeah,
I'm fishing with my son, so it's one of the few tournaments a year that I get to fish with my kids. So it's sort of should be fun. All
awesome,
right,
awesome. Well, thanks again.
all
You
right,
have a good
Claire.
rest of your night. Thanks, Michael.
All
Everybody have a
right.
good night.
Y'all have a good night.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.